The views expressed in this podcast are not those of the producer or the production company.
Hello, welcome to Mini Mathe, the miniature series belonging to Mathe, a Political Statement, the only show where you can't tell if I'm dead serious or whether I'm joking. So today, in today's Mini Mathe, we're actually going to be discussing the Second Amendment, as well as other constitutional amendments that guarantee a right to guns that people don't really realize are there. So for starters, let's read the Second Amendment out loud, shall we? A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, a lot of people hear that, and there are really two schools of thought. That the Second Amendment means a right to bear arms regardless, and the other school of thought being that there's a constitutional right to form a militia. Now, in DC versus Heller, it was actually established that it's a little bit of both. While the Founding Fathers did believe that the militia was important, and the whole point of the Second Amendment was to allow a militia to exist, the Supreme Court did rule that having a constitutional right to possess weapons was important. In that same case, however, they did decide that it is constitutionally permissible for them to ban and regulate certain types of firearms. In DC versus Heller in particular, it was a law in Washington, D.C., where they were trying to ban handguns, and I can't remember the actual name of the case, but there was an older case back in the day shortly after, or around the time of Prohibition, when this issue came up, and they were banning sawed-off shotguns because there's no logical reason to have a sawed-off shotgun, so to speak. Anyway, so the whole point of the Second Amendment was, as I said, to allow people to have guns for really the reason of maintaining a militia. This is the intended use, mind you, and I'm very pro-gun rights. But from a historical aspect, it wasn't so people could rise up and overthrow the government, which is what a lot of people think. I mean, there were certain founding fathers that thought that was important, like Thomas Jefferson, but Thomas Jefferson wanted a revolution something like every 20, 30 years. But for the most part, the Founding Fathers actually feared mob rule. Shays' Rebellion was a big problem for him. And I mean, was it Shays' Rebellion? I think it was Shays' Rebellion. Where after that, they established the Constitution rather than the Articles of Confederation. Somebody please comment on this video if I got that wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Shays' Rebellion. Anyway, so the whole thing about militia and the point of militias, back in the day when the U.S. first started, we didn't really have police officers and we didn't really have an army. So the whole idea was that if there was anything going down that needed to be dealt with, the mayor or whoever would run around town and gather up all the armed men, and they'd take care of it themselves as a large group. It was kind of a voluntary thing. So that was the whole idea of why people would need to keep guns. Now, a common misconception is that even if the Second Amendment were to be struck down, that suddenly that means that guns can be seized and nobody can own guns. And quite frankly, that's not really the case. If you look at the Ninth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, which basically means that just because something isn't mentioned in the Constitution as a right doesn't mean it's not a right within itself. The idea that, it's not in the Constitution, therefore it's not a right, is not legally permissible in a court of law. So, you have the Ninth Amendment protecting your right to bear arms. On top of that, you have the Fifth Amendment, which says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crimes unless on a presentment or indictment of grand jury, yada yada yada. Where does it say? There we are. So it says, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, which means that even if they repealed the Second Amendment, they can't just go around knocking on doors and saying, hey, give us your guns, because that is your property, and they can't do that without a warrant and a whole lot of other legal mumbo-jumbo. Now, fast forward to the 14th Amendment, which is the last little bit that I'm going to be covering in this Mini Mathe. It's basically that says the same thing as the Fifth Amendment, but rather than saying the federal government can't deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process, it says the same thing for the states. So it says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws. Which basically states that, so the idea is that you have the Second Amendment protecting your right to bear arms, you have the Fifth Amendment protecting your right to bear arms, and you have the 14th Amendment protecting your right to bear arms, and you have the 9th Amendment to protect your right to bear arms. So that's 4 parts of the Constitution that protects your right to own a gun. So the idea that repealing the Second Amendment would completely remove that is absolutely ridiculous. And this is one thing that liberals have a lot of issues understanding, is that no, it's not just one part of the Constitution that protects the right to own weapons. Even if the liberals were to repeal the Second Amendment, we have 3 other amendments that are backing up that right. So this has been this very, very short Mini Mathe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to Mathe, a political statement. We'd like to thank some of our listeners for donating to help improve our show. Logo design created by Kyle Christ. For more of Kyle's work, visit karmicclothing.com. For all sources, our donation page, our social media sites, and more, see the description down below.